the kind of athletes that you work with, is there any focus areas that you have with them, especially in endurance sport, and focus areas that you've seen more commonly with those athletes in terms of strength and conditioning?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned, I guess, how regardless of a kind of ability and background, there are a lot of common areas that we know typically are weak links within triathletes, but we know can have a pronounced and significant impact on their performance based on science, based on experience and things like that. One of the key areas is a lot of injuries, in particular, if we use those as an example, will essentially occur because there's a lack of stability in joints, and stability is driven from strength. I often describe it like a door hinge. If you unscrew the screw that puts a door hinge into the wall and then you open and close the door, it'll still work, but it might creak. And then the more you open and close it, just like the more you run, the worse it will get. Now, logically, what you do, you put the screws back in tight and you make the joint stable and strong again. When it comes to things like knee-based injuries, like meniscus being a classic example, lower back pain, all of those things are driven from a lack of stability. And the thing that you need as a triathlete is to develop the strength in the right places to be able to create that stability. But then the really cool thing off the other end of that is when you're improving one area. So I've just given maybe one area. Let's say you're a triathlete who's got lower back pain. And we're saying, right, okay, we need to develop strength, particularly for your torso and your hips, to enable you to have greater stability. It just doesn't tick off that one box. That approach will also have numerous other benefits. So another common example will be usually when it comes to running, we know to improve running economy, so the amount of oxygen you use at a given speed, if you improve that, you're going to run better, your performance is going to be better. The more you develop strength, the greater you're going to be in that area, the faster times that you'll run. There's, conclusive evidence on that with science now. So if we've done that one thing to limit your lower back pain and resolve that, the training, when it's done correctly and the puzzles put together correctly, will also actually have those positive impacts on your running economy and your running performance. And then the really cool thing with that as well is that links into then your cycling efficiency and cycling economy. So you can push up your FTP, or you can, so whatever it is. So with these kind of weak links that we typically see, whether it's with stability, whether it's usually with strength, particularly through gluteals, again, weak core and weak glutes are talked about all the time, but understanding what that actually is and how you actually train it is a real unknown for a lot of people, and there's a load of myths on it. So if we're looking at shoulders with swimmers, shoulder impingement, so just having unstable shoulders, really common. I think I put a picture out yesterday, a lot of shoulder and neck problems. Yeah, they're not a result of problems of the shoulder and neck. They're a result of lack of strength. Yeah, in your lower trapezius, your lats, all those areas. We had a guy the other day, we don't work with him, he just follows us. And he said, I noticed he was getting neck pain. I said, have you watched this video? So he goes and watches the video, and he says, I went out on my TT bike at the weekend and I haven't got neck pain anymore. Now, I'm not saying with strength and conditioning it's this magical cure that does stuff like that. To resolve that long term, he will need to do strength work in the right areas. But those are cute little wins, are really cool little areas. So I suppose to summarize, there are weak links that we typically see. Yes, that's down to strength, but usually strength that increases stability in areas because that stability isn't there. And then by improving that, we know that it won't just that one approach improve one aspect, it will improve multiple aspects. And that's why if you can understand that and you can build your training around that, it becomes very, very time efficient, because you're not doing one thing to improve one area. One stone kills multiple birds, as the old saying would say. And that's why all of a sudden it becomes time efficient.
I think that's in terms of kind of my own experiences, training, I think, as you say, there are common areas that people will perhaps tolerate, and they'll just go on, continuing to do the same thing, and they might have a niggle, or they might have something that's impacting their performance. But the importance of you guys as strength and conditioning coaches, it can unlock those things, and there is some magic to it as well, in terms of, as I said, my own experience of kind of going through 18 months of injury, and then someone within 5 minutes of me walking into the room said, you've got one leg longer than the other, and doing tests on that to find actually biomechanically that's what your problem is. Put me on a running machine, putting an insole in my shoe, and touch wood, not been injured for the last 2 years since that happened. So that small adjustment, really small adjustment of putting an insole into my shoe, has had a massive impact on my performance. Not getting injured, being able to train consistently for the last 2 years. So that aspect is, I think, really, really important.
And I think you mentioned it just before we started recording, how a lot of people, particularly in triathlon, will start to engage with strength training once they run into problems. In fact, at this stage, still most triathletes still won't. But there is a growing amount where it's like, right, I've got an injury, right? I can see strength training in some way. If I'm stronger, it might help. But again, they still really can't necessarily connect the dots like we're trying to help people with. So it's quite a reactive approach, but as you said, the more, when you look then retrospectively at it, you think, well, I wish I was just proactive and kind of did this before I ran into the problems. But I can understand why triathletes don't do that, because again, there isn't a clear and vivid link between understanding how doing this strength and conditioning malarkey actually will make me better as a triathlete. A great example, me and my colleague Craig were only speaking on, was it on Friday, about the notion of how some elements of strength training make no sense at all when you're an endurance athlete on the face of it. One of the examples being if you're building endurance, the notion is the more you do of something, the greater your endurance increases. Yet with strength training, to develop strength, what you actually find is if we go very high on repetitions, what we're actually training is actually poorer in regards to improving your triathlon performance. Actually, it's going into the realms of bodybuilding. But again, there's myths around training and muscular endurance that therefore, when you do strength work, you need to be blasting out, 20, 30 reps, you need to be having 50-second rest periods and stuff like that. Because, and that makes sense on the face of it. Logically, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But when you look at the science, because with strength and conditioning, we're not training the cardiovascular system. We're not metabolically training your energy systems. We're training something completely different. And therefore, that's why the approach is completely different. That's why we are using long rest periods. That's why we're not just banging out exercises without going through like some of the details of technique. We think about it more like swimming training with the detail, as opposed to, if you're doing an interval session when you're running, where you're just trying to blast it on out. So I can see why the mindset and the culture in triathlon falls into not understanding strength and conditioning for really what it is, because on the face of it, just doesn't make sense. But when you look at the science, and when somebody like myself can actually explain how it all pieces together, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, I understand that now. And then you can go forwards.
I think it's also really interesting, that kind of connection between where people, if you're not a strength and conditioning professional that knows how the body works biomechanically, actually determining what causes your knee pain isn't necessarily your knee. It's other areas of the muscle which are not performing properly. And to get to the bottom of that, and then designing a program around that, I think it's really, really important. As I said, my Achilles, when keep harping on about the Achilles, but it's such a fundamental milestone in my training. My Achilles problem wasn't caused by my Achilles; it was caused by other elements, and I could never have determined that myself. I needed a professional to be able to say, "Oh, 1 minute, that doesn't look right. That's what's causing it."
It's such a good point as well. I mean, we have triathletes, particularly who've usually sustained an injury, travel from all over the country, usually because even though the injury they've got isn't a complete anomaly, the sport that they do and where they want to get back to and the things that can cause it isn't commonly very well understood. Maybe in general physiotherapy realms, medical realms, strength and conditioning realms. So it's hard for people to give people a solution to their problem that actually works, because they don't understand the context of that injury. So, I mean, you've given a really good example there. I mean, another example, when we look at like repetitive calf strains, one guy springs to mind who had repetitive calf strains, tried this, that, and the other. And you kind of get to that point of where it's like, well, is this just something that I'm going to be stuck with forever and I can't do anything about it? the reason he was getting repetitive calf strains was when he ran, he was too toe dominant. Now I'm not one of these people who say you should be heel, you should be toe, because again, science shows that within certain limits, a little bit of either's fine. But look, what we do know is if you excessively toe strike, you excessively load your Achilles and calf. That isn't helpful. But the reason he did that is he had poor hip strength. And because he had poor hip strength, he was going to overstride and toe strike because it allows him to use his quads more. So his body's naturally optimized itself to work with the strength that he's got. It's not going to train him and get him moving based on strength he hasn't got. By developing obviously hip strength and doing other various things and allowing him to subtly, not without even consciously even thinking about it, but to build the toolbox. So all of a sudden just load the body slightly differently for those 200 milliseconds it's on the ground. All of a sudden, no calf problem. So it sounds really simple when you look at it in retrospect. And when you have people, like we're doing here, talk about it, but to be able to determine that and then make sense of it when you've got no idea and you're just frustrated and you've got all these problems with your body. It's a really refreshing thing to be able to actually be able to hear.
Yeah, I think, it should become the fourth discipline really in triathlon, shouldn't it? Strength and conditioning. Fifth, probably nutrition. I think the elements of kind of understanding how the body works and actually what causes the issues in terms of performance or injury are kind of probably well known by people because there are so many people talking about it. But actually that's where you come in terms of the importance of being able to work with someone that actually can help you. We can all pick up plans for cycling, we pick up plans for running, and if I was to do a marathon, if that will never happen, but if I was to do a marathon, I'd pick up a plan and work out how best to kind of load up until the point I need to do a marathon. What I wouldn't necessarily think of is actually how do I need to adapt my strength and conditioning to allow me to do an ultra, a marathon or an ultra. And I expect there are a lot of people that also of that same ilk that would just go, okay, I just need to run. I need to make sure I run this amount of time per week. They probably don't think about recovery. They probably don't think about the elements of what they need to do in the gym. And that's I guess that message needs to be sung in terms of kind of supporting people to do that.
Yeah, I mean, a really good example is we often say to people, and literally every day I'm coaching, someone will say this, or I'll say it to someone. I had a couple yesterday say, like, what you need to do with any training, but particularly strength training, biggest parallel would be compare it to swim training. What you need to do, so the exercise, the sets or reps, that's one thing. But how you execute it is going to be the main thing that will determine the benefit that you actually get. Because if you make like a subtle difference with the positioning of your body, just like you would do when you swim, it can have profound effects on actually how your body then adapts in the hours, the weeks, and the months later. And sometimes that's hard to grasp with strength training because you do need to work hard when you do it. So we always talk about using intent. But even though you're using intent and working hard, you're not kind of going into it in a relaxed state, maybe a little bit more like you would do when you swim. Yeah. You can't go through it like you're blasting out an interval session, in zone 5 and you're clinging on for dear life. It's a combination of the two. And usually what happens is people will divert to one extreme. And usually what happens is how they'll do the sets and the reps and they'll do the exercise, but how they've executed it won't be technically right. And that's not even from like a safety perspective. If you're not technically getting your limbs in the right position, subtle differences in the angles would dictate how you're loading muscles. And if you're not loading the right muscles, you're just reinforcing the same old habits that you've got. So I often say it's a bit like with swim training. You don't say, right, I've got to do 4 times 100 meters, jump in the pool and just thrash it out. Your swim coach would kill you. There's going to be points of focus, and not like a million things, because when I swim, my mind can just, my challenge is to be able to focus on one thing at a time, that's going to allow everything to fall into place. Strength training is the same. You need to have one or two things that you can think about during that exercise technique that are going to help you. But then you've got to graft and work hard. It's a unique mindset that most endurance athletes of any ability aren't used to. But ironically, when you do it and you do it right, it's one that actually can be surprisingly rewarding, because it's not what people in endurance sport usually think strength and conditioning is. Usually I think it's a big circuit, smashing stuff out, getting a real sweat on. It's a different thing. And then they can suddenly realize, oh, actually, this is quite rewarding. Actually, I quite enjoy this.
Are there any common mistakes that let's not use the word mistake. Are there common learnings from triathletes that you find, someone that comes in and says, oh, I've got, I've done this and this and this, and that really isn't what they should be doing? Are there any common areas that you find from triathletes?
So I suppose linking in with, I think what we touched based on about 15 minutes ago, there are common weak areas: gluteals, core muscles, the muscles that maneuver your shoulder blades through certain ranges of motion. And that's really like not rocket science in terms of people hearing that. It's a bit like people often who are overweight. They know how to eat healthily, but they don't actually know practically how to put the wheels into motion. So typical like kind of challenges I think that people come against when they're trying to improve those things is, first of all, in terms of exercise selection, they'll tend to gravitate towards exercises which are either too complex for them. So because they haven't got the technical ability and the strength to be able to do them, they end up really going nowhere with the exercise, and it just becomes frustrating. So, examples would be people gravitate usually a lot too early to things like single leg squats, those type of movements that are actually pretty damn complex. And actually for a lot of people don't actually work that great. For me, it's not a great exercise for me. I don't use it all, but for some people it works brilliantly. The other thing as well is realizing that even though when we're using strength training, what you're wanting to do is use exercises that are working multiple muscles and joints that matter for triathlon at once. I describe it a bit like if you imagine when you run and you cycle, your hip and your knee go through certain ranges of motion. They flex and extend, flex and extend, flex and extend, a bit like a piston in a car. And then there are dozens of muscles that will help create that movement. And it's a bit like a band. So if you had a band and you had like a drummer, keyboard player, a singer, a bass, guitar, individually, you could train those to be absolutely brilliantly. So your drummer could go and practice on his own, and your keyboard player. But if they haven't collectively learned how to operate together as a band, the music's going to be absolutely awful. It's the same with your body. Isolation exercises to isolate your glutes and isolate your core, they can have their place. So, we do use them. But you've got to use strength training at the same time, where you're using the key muscles through the key ranges of motion that the joints go collectively to have that orchestral effect. We call it intermuscular coordination. It's the ability to coordinate all these things at once. And usually that isn't done. And consequently, there's very little transfer of the strength work in the gym actually out onto the road or out into the water as well. And then probably final two things I reckon, I've mentioned this a lot, but I think it needs reinforcing, like rest periods. If your heart rate is in, your average heart rate during strength training should be really quite low, zone 1, zone 2. It should be really relatively low. It will peak at certain points. So like if you've done particularly certain exercises where you're using lots of big muscles at once, particularly if it's a single leg exercise, you're having to brace really hard through your abdomen to support the weight. You'll get off that and you'll be like, you'll have a real blow on, but you'll pass quickly. So using rest periods is absolutely pivotal. Now, what that doesn't mean is that you just stand around and twiddle your thumbs for 2 minutes, because that's just pretty boring. When you structure strength training properly, you can put in other exercises and mobility work that's lower in intensity or using other parts of the body that will allow the area of your body that you've just trained to recover suitably for when you do the next set. And that's kind of like the art of putting together what's there. Makes it time efficient as well at the same time. But the one thing that you typically see is with any type of triathlete or endurance folk, and it makes sense because of what you expect, they'll just blast through exercises just like you blast through an interval session or training session. Again, we're not training your cardiovascular system, your metabolic system. We're training what we call your neuromuscular system, the ability, nerves to turn on muscles. If you look at 50, 60 years of science, hundreds of years of coaching experience, if you want to improve that, you need recovery, because then you're either going to move your body quicker or you're going to move a bigger weight, which means your body's going to adapt better for that. The final thing then will be, again, reinforcing technique. It sounds so simple, but to get this reinforced in a triathlete's mind it's a process. Very little at the time will they just be like, oh yeah, I understand that now, and now I'm technically perfect. It takes real attention and focus on being able to really understand what it means to concentrate on the right things technically, but still work hard. And again, that's where understanding, a bit like with swimming, we're getting swim coaching. For me, it enables me to not have to worry about stuff that doesn't matter, but focus on one or two key things that will really help. Same as strength work. Through understanding the right cues, you can focus on one or two things that will enable everything to fall into place without your head just being full of information and then you're not knowing really what to do. So we could go on, but there, I think, kind of 3 or 4 things that if you can solve and get your head around as a triathlete, you'll make immense positive change with what you're doing, and that's going to impact your swim, bike, and run much more.
I think the point around that last point you made around the journey, I think it's so. I mean, you wouldn't go to a yoga class, never done yoga before, to expect to be able to do the most hardest of the exercises. I mean, you just wouldn't. And your strength and conditioning works in the same way, doesn't it? So you need to look at it in terms of, I'm not going to be able to perfect the exercises I need to do to strengthen the muscles because my muscles are not there yet. But the great thing about this whole process is I can look at along the stages of my progress to see exactly how I've improved. And often those exercises will have markers and abilities for you to be able to see. So, for example, how much weight I can lift is a great example of kind of your ability to know that you strengthened the muscle, or the way in which you're able to perform, I don't know, downward dog in a yoga class. Those elements of kind of being able to. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I speak, I'm generalizing and definitely stereotyping, but patience, I think, is absolutely key. You're not going to go from being where you are now to a position of improvement within weeks. It is a journey and often can take years. And I think as soon as you accept that and actually then just focus on the now, that's, from my experience, is important. So I just look at every session as being my opportunity to follow exactly what I've been told to do to the best of my ability. I'm also conscious that what I do today is going to impact tomorrow, the next day. So I have to be careful that what I'm doing is moderated in a way that allows me to do the rest of my training plan. But generally speaking, I do tend to focus on it. It's taken a long time, again, for me to understand that. But the other point around recovery, as I think as triathletes, people are very, very poor at, and again, I'm generalizing, very poor at taking enough recovery time. Being able to reduce the load down to allow your body to recover is fundamentally important. And if you look at it from the perspective of every time you do any sort of exercise, what you are doing is damaging the muscle. You're damaging yourself, and therefore you have to repair in order to, you have to recover and rest in order to repair those muscle groups. Otherwise, all you're going to continue to do is just continue to put fatigue onto your body. Your body will then start to reject that, and you'll see that you're unable to perform to the maximum ability.
Yeah, I mean, funny speaking to an Australian triathlete a couple of weeks ago, and she said how one of the big breakthroughs with her and her recovery was increasing her protein intake a little bit, just to reduce the delayed muscle soreness that she was experiencing. in the kind of, you know, the days afterwards, particularly certain types of training sessions and any type of training session. So I think there's always key areas with recovery that all of us can improve. Also, there's areas that we know we can improve, which will never change, because whether it's socially or whatnot, you know, anyone who follows our Instagram know I like a little bit of a drink and stuff like that. And, you know, there are links to reduce strength performance and delayed muscle soreness being worse if you had a bit of a drink. But, you know, I balance it on out. But again, even with strength training and that notion of muscle soreness, and like the impact that training has on your body, that I think there's a common view. And again, I totally understand why it is that almost strength training is one of the most demanding things on your body as a triathlete, when actually it's the least demanding. So if we look at science, whether it's looking at the loading on the spine during swimming, whether it's looking at the load on your calves or your knee joints when you run in your cycle, strength training doesn't even get close to loading those areas anywhere near as negatively. And equally with strength training, if we're doing the right technique, we're going to load the right muscles. So we're not going to run into having a sore back and those type of common things. We're having a sore neck because we've used wrong technique. And equally as well, if it's done properly and we're not using these ridiculous rep schemes that you'd use for, like, if you're a bodybuilder, but it kind of makes sense because it's endurance-y in nature, you're going to have far less delayed muscle soreness, because the approaches that you use to improve the things that we've talked about, turning on the nerves in the right muscles at the right time and getting the muscles to collaborate with one another at the right time, just like that band, the training to do that actually should evoke minimal muscle soreness. And equally as well, someone said, actually, we speaking to the same lady, she was saying how a big thing for her was the notion of actually understanding that your S&C work fits into like a weekly schedule. It's not just something that you do for the off season. It's a bit, I can't remember what it is. There's a classic saying, was it a dog's for life, not just for Christmas? And it's the same with strength conditioning. Like, it's if you dip in and out of it each week, you're going to get sore, because the physiological effect of strength training is when you do something new, like a new exercise, you will get an increase in delayed muscle soreness, just like if you do a longer distance on your bike, or you change your bike setup or your swim technique. So it's the same with everything. But if you repeat that same thing with subtle changes in maybe the load or the volume of it over each week, the delayed muscle soreness is significantly lower. But if you miss that 1 week, next session, it's going to peak back up again. The same as if you missed one of your run sessions 1 week, so you didn't run for 2 weeks, you can guarantee after that next run session, your calves, your hamstrings, they're probably going to be a bit sore. So the consistency of how you do your strength work, quality over quantity, will make it consistent. And again, that means that muscle soreness from your strength training will be minimal compared to what it would be from your swim, bike and run.
Yeah, I think that's really important. That element as well of kind of, you know, I have a recovery week, which is, you know, a deload week where you're reducing everything to easy endurances. But how many times do you see people say, I'm on a recovery week, I'm going to do an easy run? There's no such thing as an easy run. Or, you know, even things like sports massages, working those into the plan. I find sports massage really important mentally, because not, you know, jury's out in terms of how it improves recovery, but mentally it's something that kind of, for me, is an important milestone in my plan, because I know that's the point that I'm having a sports massage, because I'm in recovery week, and it's my opportunity to loosen everything up and make sure that I'm then ready for the next training block. But actually, what you are doing is you're also you're stressing those muscles. So understanding where it all fits and how strength and conditioning fits in your plan, I think, as you say, is really, really important. So,
I was going to say, with your deload point, I think it's a real valuable one. I think deloading is one of those things that's not commonly used enough or appropriately in all types of training.
As a term,
yeah, and actually with strength and conditioning, again, there's various ways you can go about it to make it very practical, but we encourage people over certain periods to perform a deload in a certain way, because as you've mentioned, if you just keep hitting yourself over the head with the same type of training, pushing the miles, you're burning the candle at both ends. And we know you can super compensate and get a bigger increase in all the qualities that improve you as a triathlete if you do take those deloads at the right periods. And often I had one the other week, and you often don't feel at your best during a deload, a bit like you don't feel at your best when you do a taper. And I think it's almost because psychologically you've come off that adrenaline push of getting through those cycles in the weeks before, and then you know that you kind of, it's not the same. So I think almost, I'm not going to say it's adrenaline, it could be anything, but that kind of psychological edge, everything just lowers and relaxes a bit. So naturally, you've not got that kind of added gear mentally to push that little bit harder. So things do feel, not those training sessions make you think, crikey, do I usually do 40% extra than this? But you do, because on the weeks that you've got to do that, psychologically, you're in check, you're in gear, your body's in a good place to go.
Well, seeing it as part of the process, I think has been an important aspect for me. So understanding that actually to improve, I need to take rest weeks, recovery weeks, where I'm just doing very, very minimal, lots of swimming, a couple of easy runs, and some very easy bike sessions, just to keep everything ticking over. But it is an important aspect. I do speak to quite a lot of people and who are training, and often there's a resistance to there's a thought that I'm not improving because I'm not training properly. And actually, if you look at it the other from a different perspective, which is I can't train properly next week and can't put all those improvements into place unless I actually give my body an opportunity to rest.
Ironically, I find it easier to deload my endurance stuff than my strength stuff. So I can see why triathletes, endurance athletes, they find it harder the other way around, because it's within you. It's this innate little thing, and you're like, oh, I've had this really good, push, and then it's like, well, could I do a week more? And you've kind of got to trust. You've got to trust the process of what you're doing, but to trust that process, you've got to understand the methodology. You've got to believe that, okay, it will work because of this, that, and the other. So I can grasp the mental battles that we all have sometimes with deloads and tapers.
Yeah, I think it's just natural, isn't it? Especially if you're addicted to endurance sports, because it is. I mean, it is at the end of the day. If you're training for any type of triathlon, more so with kind of half Ironman and Ironman, you have got a slight addiction. And because you know that you've got a slight addiction when you actually take a recovery week, and you're eager to, if you take a rest day and you're like, oh, I could just go down and just do some weights or just do a little bit of a run on treadmill. That is an addiction. You've got to the point where your body is telling you that it's craving for that to create those hormones.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Well, just in terms of wrapping up, it'd be good just to talk about Tritenacious and your process and your system that you've got in place and your app.
Yes, so Tritenacious essentially is it's actual strength and conditioning support for triathletes from actual strength and conditioning coaches who do this as a profession. So what we do, we work with people across 9 different countries. And what we do is we support them with a strength and conditioning regime, which is practical, scientifically underpinned, and again, is following exactly the same principles that we do with coaching people in person as well. We use an app-based platform for it, but we're always very clear that it's not just a training program that you follow. We also include in that coaching masterminds, the opportunity for people to send videos for technical feedback, to show that we are actually here as coaches for people. It's not just, right, you just tick this box. And for some people, they just want to crack on with the program, and that's fine. But it's enabling triathletes to use strength and conditioning properly, that they can trust to improve their performance, improve their injury prevention, and allow them to enjoy being a triathlete more. So it's really exciting, because it's the only thing of its kind really in the world. It enables us to work with people as well beyond our 4 walls as well. So yeah, people can learn more about that and get in touch, tritenacious.com. And equally, my email address, you can bang that on the show notes if you want, or whatever suits you.
Or do, yeah, I'll put some information in just to kind of summarize what has to get in contact with you. But it's been really great speaking to you on the podcast, and I've enjoyed our chats. Fascinating, and as I said during, I think we sold the message through the podcast about the importance of strength and conditioning. I do think it is very important, and doing a great job of kind of getting people in the right place. So thank you for today.
Thank you. Really enjoyed that. And yeah, best of luck with the podcast. It was brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you.